So this is my attempt to give my condensed version of a really complex, long story in under 1 hour. Ready? Go. So I thought I would do a video because I'm doing all this content for the public, for YouTube and DTube and the internet airwaves in general, just to give an overview on my story, how I became now an active MRA, a men's rights activist, why I would even get there and support the philosophy. So given a background, obviously the majority of how I got there was through family court and dealing with a woman and a parent that I think is a narcissist and a cluster B, and my awareness around narcissism, true narcissism, and the growing rate of narcissism in our culture. But narcissism, its place, difference between men and women, and its place in family court, where there's such a blatant bias and power structure for women specifically, and not for men. And so how all these factors can come into play and have come into play in my case, leading me to today, to being an MRA. So I'm going to try to do a Cliff Notes version of my basic story leading into this. So my relationship, I was dating a woman for about just over 1.5 years, and we had an accidental, non-planned pregnancy. It's tough to say accidental because you know what you're doing, but non-planned pregnancy. And through that non-planned pregnancy, we both came to acceptance, take responsibility, although we didn't plan it. I'm pro-children. I planned my first child, and so we embraced it. And we're embracing what that meant as a couple, as your obligation to each other and to your children. So we embraced that first pregnancy, ended up terminating at 5.5 months through what I was told was an accident, a car crash on an interstate in Texas, where the mother of my child rolled the car and said the damage was significant enough that we lost a 5.5-month-old baby. This was in 2012. So from 2012 to the following year, 2013, we went through healing, loss, grief, and reconnectivity, where we did 8 months of planning and soul searching and deep talking, sharing our goals, our values, our intentions, and ultimately ended up planning intentionally a second pregnancy, which occurred in 2013, September of 2013. So that led into the development of, in our particular situation, conflict and ultimately separation. And we separated during the pregnancy over some really complex issues, much of what I intend to expand on in the not Cliff Notes version, where I'll go more in detail on the history of my case. But, in hindsight, this is where I've learned about narcissism and cluster B personalities. The chaos that ensued wasn't just typical drama and discordance that leads to separation. There was a lot of really serious things going on. Nonetheless, this led to our separation, which led to the mother of my child relocating first to Florida, then to Texas, and then back to Colorado. That's where we're from. And then ultimately she left here 4 weeks before delivery and relocated in the state of Oregon, where they reside today. So that was leading up to the birth of my daughter, who is now just over 3.5 years old. But this would be leading up to the summer of 2014 is when my daughter was born. So that's the basic history of how we got to conception and my child being brought into this world. So my child being born the summer of 2016 began with intense conflict, but the fundamentals are the mother of my child was refusing to allow me any access. Our agreement, we planned our pregnancy, so we had a written out understanding of what we were intending to do and provide and commit to each other, which involved, being locally close to each other. And so when all that changed, it became, in my opinion, a blackmail situation, which was that I could agree to terms that she was laying out, which had to do with a type of relationship that she wanted to have, and I could be involved in my daughter's life here in Colorado, or if I didn't agree, that I would have no recognition of paternity, I would be offered no parenting time and no access. And what she told me is that she would disappear, and had lots of money saved and had enough resources that I would never find or see her or my daughter again. So we went into paternity litigation ultimately, where I tried to file for acknowledgement of paternity and for custody, some sort of custody rights and parenting time. And ultimately, she went into hiding. We were unable to find her. And while we were trying to locate her and my daughter, she filed for litigation and custody in the state of Oregon, where my daughter was born. UCCJEA is the jurisdictional statutes and legislation that oversees what state would have jurisdiction. Ultimately, Oregon took jurisdiction of the whole matter, so to even fight for any time, I would have to go to Oregon. What happened when they took jurisdiction was they put in what's called a status quo order. This order meant that what was will continue to be until there's some other type of hearing that will look at all the claims, the petitions, the requests, and sort it out. So the default order that Oregon put in was that what was that mother was the only parent that had time, and so that would continue. And since father had no time, that was me, that would continue, and we could petition the state for otherwise. So meaning that the default of the state of Oregon was that jurisdictionally and legally, statutorily, and based on any rights or laws, that the mother of our child was allowed full custody and the father was allowed no custody. So in the sense of equal parentage or protection under the state, equal protection, that was the default. So obviously, precursing and leading up to men's rights, this was the beginning. I didn't have vocabulary or understanding or any knowledge. I understood that I was not being treated equally, that I certainly had no value in the eyes of the state and in comparison to the mother of our child. So that didn't take a rocket scientist to figure out, but articulating, okay, what are the laws? And I know this doesn't feel right, but justifying, much less seeing the history of what is the normative now, took the 3.5 years that I've been in litigation since that first status quo order. So, but that was a blatant reality at the onset of my daughter's life, because I was allowed not even an hour. I couldn't get any time. So that went into negotiations and litigation. The hearings for family court take a long time. It takes a long time to get on the docket and to be heard, and what the back and forth between the lawyers. I was self-represented in propria persona at that time, or pro se as they call it. And it's a nightmare, so the first 6 months, I didn't meet my daughter till she was 6 months old. And so that time was filled with litigation, fighting, which was backed by an order that said mother had all time, father would be granted no time. So over the next 5 months, we agreed on a stipulated judgment, which means that we settled right before we were to go to court, and agreed outside of court privately, quote unquote privately. But that's what a stipulated judgment is, an agreement between the parties without the judge involved in the mediation and the debating and fact-finding and all that. So we reached an agreement, stipulated judgment, where mother and my daughter would return to Colorado from Oregon, and I would have an incrementally increasing parenting plan as my daughter got to know me. And so that would increase until the age of 3, where we would share 50-50 custody. To reach that stipulated judgment cost me $18,000. So I eventually had to get attorneys once Oregon took jurisdiction, and I was treated completely different in Oregon from being self-represented in Colorado to begin with, where I felt like the judges really helped me, and I've done videos on that, so I'm not going to repeat it, the difference between Oregon and Colorado. But ultimately, it was very expensive. Litigation, attorneys, stipulated judgment. My daughter returns to Colorado. This is Christmas 2014 is when I met my daughter. I met her on Thanksgiving. They flew out for one day and then they relocated for Christmas until my daughter was 1 year old. At 1 year old, I won't go over the conflict and the details between this time. I'll do that in the non-condensed version, see how short I can get this to be. But at 1 year old is when the chaos ensued, false domestic violence claims, which is a topic in itself that I hope to cover far more detail, as well as the ramifications and the difference in abuse and violence, and male violence versus female violence, the Duluth model and the tendency in this culture to back the woman and the female and the mother, no questions asked. And they get the presumption of the doubt, so I didn't know about any of these things, and I have been an advocate for the protection of women and women's movements and what I probably prior to this would have defined as feminist movements, and just the well-being of the balance of humanity. I'm for all people, and certainly anti-violence and the non-aggression principle, advocate for the non-aggression principle. So domestic violence and false claims, and especially when you get into family courts and the increased statistics and rates of the obvious use of false domestic violence and abuse claims by women specifically, and what is being recognized in the courts and what's not being recognized in the courts. What's being recognized domestically through psychology, the shelters and the psychologists who are dealing with men and women and really getting the statistics and the firsthand experience on people opening up and bearing witness to their own experience. So that's why I feel in the future I'm going to spend a lot of focus on false accusations and its impact on men and men's rights and women's rights. The Duluth model is directly involved with women's rights, and I don't know that there's any equivalent that applies to males and men. Hence the discrepancy and the damage that I see and I feel that I've gone through personally in relationship to this. So the false domestic claim in my case is what led to Oregon giving full emergency custody. If I wanted any parenting time, it was through observation with a psychologist in a building in the state of Oregon. I think they would allow me an hour of time supervised. Nothing more than a claim, no hearing. Obviously, I was granted a hearing because we still have certain procedural processes and due processes. You know, it's debatable how much and where, and that's why I think there's a bias and why we should do these videos and bear witness and testimony to the true statistics in our experience. And if that represents us as a collective, as individuals, as a free society, as alleged moral, family valued humans. I know the destruction of the family and the decrease of the family, so now it's just maybe moral valued humans, not family values, but I'm an advocate for family values and the importance and significance of family specifically, and the benefit to children as well as to society, which is a topic in itself. But I digress. So getting back to domestic violence claims, what I was allowed, ultimately with a claim like this, you're allowed a hearing within a 14-day period of time. So I had to get attorneys, because so much was at stake. So through the false domestic violence claims, I had a domestic violence investigation with the police department and the detective unit specifically for domestic violence. I had a court hearing for domestic violence and a permanent protection order protecting the mother from me, because her claim was that I was the abuser and she was the victim. A note here is that I have had a prior protection order that I got against her a year before, which was granted a permanent protection order. And so it just is important, and obviously it impacted the decisions, I think, of what cleared my name and didn't allow any charges against me ultimately. I had a hearing in Colorado, protection order, domestic violence. An investigation in Colorado lasted 8 months through the police department and the detective agency for domestic violence specifically. And then I had the custody emergency domestic violence hearing in Oregon as well. So 2 hearings and a police investigation. Took almost a year of my life, and I won't go into just smear campaigns which have to do with cluster Bs and narcissists, but also just bad people that don't have any moral conscience and integrity. And so the impact that has on the human, and in this case, countless men, for false domestic violence claims specifically. I'm statistically referencing false domestic violence is predominantly with women. I'm sure men do it, but in this society, it predominantly comes from women, where they can accuse, the new third wave feminists can accuse rape culture and the patriarchal abuse. And we can have that conversation. Obviously that's what a lot of this is leading into, and trying to put my 2 cents in, as well as bridge some gaps and work for change. But false domestic violence claims, predominantly with women, and increasingly involved with child custody cases and divorce cases, as an obvious tactic and tool for power and getting what you want through money, litigation, and child custody, especially when you have children. So bringing awareness to false domestic claims is going to be a big part of me moving forward, because of what I've gone through and experienced, and I don't want to see anybody go through that. And I feel that right now the laws with rape are obvious, and I think everybody supports that. I've still yet to come across somebody who is an advocate for rape that doesn't support castrating and imprisoning and otherwise to people that are that damaged and that wicked. And being an advocate for a solution of health and rehabilitation and otherwise healing, and the full spectrum of being a compassionate, empathetic try to be optimistic human while realizing we still support putting the mad dog down, that there's a way to ethically protect people from themselves and from others, and the relationship to the non-aggression principle and violating that, and what we propose to do to have order and justice in mass society. So isn't that where all our ethics and our critique and legislation of laws and morals and values come from anyways, philosophically and procedurally and practically in our culture? From what we're trying to define and articulate and refine as good, as moral, as right, as just. So that's why I would comment on all of this and bring my private life into the public, because I think my experience has been that skewed on the bias in this arena, which is a huge arena, especially in the destruction of families and what creates good children and healthy humans and productive humans and responsible humans, if we're talking about deadbeat dads or malicious single mothers. There's a lot of healing that needs to happen everywhere, and the way we get to that is through articulation and accountability, which comes from humility, being open to look at yourself and others and judge and critique, hopefully compassionately, in a way that people can hear it and choose to better themselves and be better people. That's my goal with all of life, with my children, with my family, with my community, society at large, probably in that order. So that's why we address this. That's why we offer our experience and our testimony and our proposed solutions, what we can do to make anything better. So the domestic violence was a huge part of my life. It still is. Luckily, I was not charged with anything. The case was closed in the police department. Both hearings, the hearing in Colorado, I was awarded attorney's fees for having to defend myself, where the judge was very clear that she felt it was a continuation of the harassment that validated the permanent protection order that I originally had, which just gets into how crazy it is, especially when you're dealing with a cluster B and the backlash and their inability to take responsibility with anything. That's part of the reason I'm still dumbfounded today to how ultimately my case got where it is now, where it just seems like none of that's acknowledged. It doesn't matter that she was charged with harassment and applied a protection order. The difference that I see in women with protection orders to men, she was still violating the protection order. They weren't going to arrest her, and they took it as a joke, where a man, I've seen, you do any violation. I've seen people that have unwarranted temporary protection orders against them, and if you do anything to violate that, as a man, they're going to put out the warrant immediately, take you to jail. Don't stop it, go. So that's the Duluth model again, and the societal advocacy for women and the protection of women, and what we'll do to believe them prior to facts, due process, judgment. So judge before jury kind of thing. So that's a big part leading into that whole domestic violence thing. Took approximately 8 months. During those 8 months, she was in Oregon the whole time. And so they allowed her to stay in Oregon until a change in custody could be heard, which took months. I think it took another 10 months or something. And so that whole time, she's the primary caretaker. I have almost no time trying to clear my name through alleged due process for domestic violence, at which they ultimately had the custody hearing in Oregon. This was after going through a parental evaluation, which cost $17,500. This parental evaluation involves psychological exams, IQ tests, in-home observation of you parenting your children, I had a daughter she's now 11, so at that time she was 9 or 10, the evaluation. But they come in your house, they go through your house, they go, I mean, talk about the right for privacy, any of that. It's just, you have very little rights. That's how I feel. And even less and less as a man in family courts. I mean, they bypass civil liberties, everything. Constitutional rights is not even a topic in there. In fact, I feel when I brought any of that, I was reprimanded very severely and clearly for even addressing and questioning the constitutionality of everything from the jurisdiction to giving mother full custody at birth and the whole process, which leads me into men's rights, obviously. Or maybe not obviously, but that's why I'm trying to be clear and articulate my experience. So from the domestic violence, we went into the custody hearing. They allowed mother to stay, had the psychological exams. The evaluator ultimately was the deciding. He was 99% of what the judge was going to do. That's, as my lawyer says, and as I've read and understood, the judges don't go against the parental evaluators. They're psychologists, and I'll expand on the expanded edition, but, I'll go into my objections and the severity of this one person's role and the influence over families in my life and the job that he has and the weight that he has and the power he has and the importance of integrity and validating, like knowing what you did was right. And there was just so much I'd like to go into just about parental evaluators and their power and my experience with this specific evaluator, that I can't stress enough how terrifying it is and how important it is to understand what family courts are doing and what these processes are and what we're getting out of them. So I won't go too long on the parental evaluator, but he ended up coming to testify. I will say, my attorney spoke to him the night before and said, just shoot it to us straight. Are you going to testify that mother should stay in Oregon or should return to Colorado, where father is, and where they agreed to parent out of? And this is after investigating the domestic violence is concluded and all of that. So the evaluator told my attorney straight up that his recommendation was that mother shouldn't have left Colorado, that was the best place for child to be. And although he didn't think or know if the court could enforce that or order a human to relocate, they could order that the child relocate and that was the best interest of the child, but maybe not to order a parent that they would have to move somewhere. So, but in my opinion, it's semantics because they were arguing if she should have been allowed to relocate to Oregon. So it becomes wordplay, and that's what legalese is, in my opinion, is a ton of wordplay and word sorcery and really goofy stuff that has to do with the death of common sense and the death of the common law. And so ultimately, that's what the court agreed, and this attorney came in, the evaluator came in and didn't recommend that she should come back to Colorado, which is fine. I think it's unethical that he would tell our attorney that, and then we would pay him $2,000 just because if you want the evaluator to come in personally and testify, it costs $2,000 for the hearing. So we paid $2,000. I'm going to tell you what, my attorney felt so bad and shocked about what happened. He paid it out of his pocket. And it's one thing I'll say about that attorney, because I think that attorney is a human being, has a good heart. And the ones that do deserve to be recognized, because I worked hard to be ethical about the attorneys I would use and the ones I chose to fire, because I had some wicked devils that I came to understand. And as soon as I knew who they were and what their character was, I got rid of them immediately, because I don't think it has any place in family law in humanity. Like, that's not how I war. If I'm on a war, I'm going to try to war ethically and like a the Shaolin, you know, with compassion as the first and foremost of my intent, and peace and balance and harmony and progression as my intention, and destruction and chaos and bloodshed as the least. You know, you want to prevent that you want prevention of that. We'll talk about by all means necessary. That's what we try to do by all means necessary, is prevent destruction and prevent warfare and prevent hatred and wickedness and battling and all that. That's why prevent debating, encourage dialogue, you know, work for harmony, work for common ground, not in homogenization of everything, but in the name of peaceful co-navigation of the planet and of life with the diversity that is here. So, going into that custody hearing, they gave mother basically full custody. She sued me for $100,000 in attorney's fees, was awarded just under $50,000. I was allotted 8 days a year, 4 weekends a year, 4 times a year, for 8 days. And, you know, sued for, that was after we spent maybe $100,000 from my family and my parents' retirement and my savings and everything we had. So we were out $100,000 to get 8 days a year, and I was sued for just under $50,000. I had to split the cost of the evaluator at $17,000. What would be in the Midwest? You could buy a home. You know, talking about investment and it's just smart decisions for family, and what the courts end up doing. College tuition. I mean, I think college now, that's its own topic, right? College being a source of debt and what you get out of it as opposed to going into trade. So I probably wouldn't invest that money into college, but historically, that's what we're still talking about, what smart families did, what the American ideal and dream was, and education and productivity of self and knowledge of self and what you're going to give to your family and your community. So certainly you could invest $150,000. Some families never see that at one time or in a 2-year span. You know, at that point, we were just at 2 years old for my daughter. So to spend $150,000 we're still internalizing, digesting, and opposing, and trying to reason how that could be, as well as raise awareness for that it should never be. What these courts are doing it's so inefficient that it's not excusable, and it's not negligence. That's all I can say, and that's why we need a massive reform of common sense, and especially in family courts and going to criminal courts and all that, but I digress. So from all that custody, I was given 8 days a year. For the next year, it was just battling. It was battling over the traveling expenses, the costs, all the receipts. It's been, since my daughter was born, it's been non-stop litigation over anything you could fight about. I can't imagine what my daughter's mother has spent on attorney's fees. What I've seen personally in the billing from what they've tried to sue me for is over $200,000, which shocks me. It shocks me, where do you get that money? You know, just from what I've known of her and my economic status, like that kind of money to me is life-changing. So when you're getting into child support and everything I'm facing since, and child support arrears and the liens against me and garnishing my bank accounts and all the things that have happened while we've spent, you know, collectively over $250,000. What would change a child's life? That one child, my daughter's not even 4. To have $250,000 spent on what is atrocious. It's unconscionable. So for the next year, we had litigation, and that led into this year that we're at, 2017 into 2018. And We were assigned a parental coordinator, who is another psychologist, different than the evaluator, who charges $300 an hour, $3,000 retainer, and any complaints have to go through this mediator. It's supposed to stop and minimize litigation. It didn't stop or minimize litigation at all for me. So I was paying the PC and being sued in court and being petitioned against. The petition they did the next year was to remove my parenting time completely, to remove the 8 days. So that litigation took about 7 months. In that roughly 9-month period, the mother and my daughter spent about the bills that I saw was $97,000, which they sued me after this court hearing just ended, for $50,000, of which they received or were ordered to have paid roughly $19,000. So they want attorney's fees again. The court order moved from 8 days a year to 15 days a year, moved from 4 times a year to 3 times a year. So I get 5 days, 3 times a year. My daughter's going to be 4. Okay, I'm the father of a 4-year-old girl who will get 15 days a year. How do you pass down culture? How do you pass down lessons and values? How do you pass down anything that is you as any parent with 15 days a year? You don't. It's a joke. It's a blatant statement of devaluing and a lack of recognition for any role that I have as a father. And I think it's predominantly fathers. That's why moving into MRAs and a men's rights activist and an activist just for the awareness of the whole nature of this, because I think there's a lot of good women out there who don't realize what third wave feminism and lots of feminism in general have done to devalue the father, and what socialism has done to destroy and devalue the family and attack the father and try to instill a philosophy in the women and the mothers. And so do we value that? I know what I've learned in the last 4 years, and that's as somebody who feels like was pretty invested in politics and social structures and philosophy and culture prior to that. And my knowledge base, just having gone through family court, has increased exponentially, you know, and with such a focus on family and rights and the relations between men and women and the damage and the strengths as well. And specifically in my relationships and in my family and with my community, old and currently. And the refinement of my own values and my intentions and what I want moving forward for myself, and what I'd hope for as far as rights and protection go, at least, which is far different than getting real specific about what your cultural, family, morals and values and beliefs really are, and what you want to pass down to your own children, much less what you hope for collectively in society with everybody else's families and children, because we want them to be good humans too. We don't want young derelicts that are hooded out, that are disrespecting your goods and your privacy and your property and graffitiing your shit and stealing your goods and beating your women, right? Or disrespecting your men. Why we deal with values and respect and ethics and tact and class and intelligence and all that to begin with, because it's good. So I'm on my 3.5 years of litigation. I had to fight for having any time from birth. There was no system, there was no cultural anything, much less legislative anything, that offered me an hour of my time raising my daughter. I had to fight for an hour, and then I had to fight for a day, and now I've had to fight for 15 days. And in fighting for these 15 days, I was just sued again for attorney's fees. And they were awarded, I mean, think of that. $19,000, that's, think what kind of car that gets. In a lot of places, that's like a down payment on a mortgage on a house, investing back into your family, right? You could put that obviously into stocks, into investments, into something that works for you. But even, getting into the ethics of somebody at my income level and my annual income, which is around there. I was a stay-at-home dad. I wasn't a career father. So they knew that I wouldn't have $20,000 to pay. And so what does that imply? What does that imply for the values? What does that imply for common sense? What does that imply for trying to get my daughter out here to have physical time if I'm paying the mother everything I have and don't have and struggling just to get FaceTime? Like, what does that communicate that you feel for any child having their biological father in their life, or a father, period? Because it doesn't seem like they care at all about fathers to me. And so, hence men's rights. Fathers are so important. Parents are important. Family is super important. Family is something. So a mother and a father in a family, we have to value them. And then we can talk about equality or the differences where mothers are maybe more uniquely maternally valuable and where fathers are more paternally valuable, because there are differences and we should embrace those and talk about them and define them and articulate them so that we know what they are, so that that's what we encourage in young boys and that's what we encourage in young girls. So that's why it's refined my specifics for what I know are my family values, and why it's defined what I see as the state, especially the state of Oregon, their family values. And I think lots of states, predominantly, I think that's probably where states lean and tend to rule, in the likes of the Duluth model, and backing mothers, tender years doctrine. Look into that, right? Like just giving the babies to the women. And now we've seen the effects of that. And if you talk to the psychologists, if you read the reviews and the stats, like, to me it seems obvious. It's predominantly that's destructive and has had detrimental consequences to our children, to our boys and our girls, which lead to our adult men and our women, which are the fathers and the mothers, right? Basic common sense. And so looking at the suicide rates and just the problems and the problems and the problems that we know come from devaluing and excluding fathers. And so I can't look any further than the specific people, the attorneys and the judges that have ruled, and the evaluators and the parental coordinators who have or have not spoken up on any number of matters. And so that's why I'm sharing my story. That's why I'm trying to find ways to articulate the complexity of separating my personal woes from the greater collective, when we're just talking about fathers having value, like, isn't necessarily about all the specifics of my case, because tons of fathers have, although similar stories, very different ones, from the spectrum of the complexity. So, having gone through all this, whatever a man's story is, and it's not even about men, it's because parental alienation syndrome, that goes both ways, I think, statistically in family courts, because there's a bias toward mothers that they have more power. And so there's probably more fathers that are truly alienated through the power and the force and the backing of court orders than there are mothers. But that doesn't mean that men aren't narcissists or cluster Bs or damaged, vindictive humans too. The statistics on just people being vindictive and violent and abusive seem like men and women are both equally violent and abusive and damaged. So on the surface, I think neither gender should be on some ivory tower boasting too much about anything. We have so much progress to do as humans in general, that we should be humble and, trying to be authentic while being humble, while acknowledging self and what we can do to improve ourselves first while we're judging and critiquing the world. So this whole process, though, is what led me into the study of, well, how could the laws get this way? Do I have the same equal protection as parentage, and the fluctuation from the men having more rights to now women having more rights, and the claim that it's allegedly not that way, that tender years doctrine isn't the case, that the Duluth model in family custody cases isn't obvious, biased, and judged toward in favor of the mothers and the women. And is that good? And so that went into my studies and the research. Am I trying to find peace for my heart and do what I feel was right as a father and what I still feel is right, which is to be involved in my daughter's life, and why I would be prevented from that, and how I could negotiate or find ways to find common ground and achieve my goal, which is to be in my daughter's life. So that led into studying and learning about law, as her attorney accused me of taking this opportunity to try to be a lawyer and practice law, as though I'm not in there fighting for my seed and my family. I'm in there just because I like reading Black's Law dictionaries and legalese and case studies and all this stuff that has its place in a ethical, functional society, but is absurd and offensive to think that that's why I'm in there trying to plead the best case that I can for more than 15 days a year with my child, to pass down my culture, my values, my ethics, what I think is important, my lessons, much less sharing time and love and space and creation with your family. Like, that's why we're here. So that's why I got into men's rights. I learned that my case was not unique. It's unique, but it's not unique, and that there's millions of men who've gone through the exact same thing, have been devalued and ordered out of their children's lives, turned into nothing more than a paycheck, and understanding how that came to be and what the organizations that are already out there are doing about it, because thank God there's already motion and movement and progress, not just from men, but from women, from psychologists, from people that value families and value truth and logic and common sense, and I think love, as the pinnacle, the peak of our priorities and our values. So that led into my studies of feminism, how little I knew about feminism, first, second, and third wave, if we're on neo fourth wave feminism and all the semantics, I don't know. I still have a lot to learn, but certainly what I've concluded is that feminism has played an obvious significant role in the custodial tendencies and laws that exist right now, as well as the obstacles for the men's rights movement that I see existing right now, getting legislation and support and social awareness and power around equally. That's why I don't believe feminism is about equality and egalitarianism and humanitarianism, because I see them as the #1 advocates against men's rights, and I don't get it. I'm a man, and I'm in this court system, and I want to be in my daughter's life, and I'm being denied. And I don't hear feminists advocating for that. And obvious, the people that we do see speaking out, and the women that we see speaking out against feminism, from Erin Pizzey to Karen Strahan, I mess up people's names, to Camille Paglia. There's so many that are out there doing good work. that I'm so thankful for, because I feel like as a truth seeker, you can tell when things are super partisan and just not objective and super biased, and to where we see now, where it's like you see the feminists and what they're saying about men's rights isn't what men's rights is saying. And so it's like when you're arguing what somebody else is arguing and it's incorrect, where is the debate going? Because you're truly debating at that point and not dialoguing, much less treating people with respect and intellect and using reason and patience. And in native culture, the talking stick, shut your mouth until you got the talking stick. Like, where did respect for others and elders and people in general go? Like some common decency, some tact. So that's where I'm at today. That's the history of my story. That's why I'm studying feminism, third wave feminism, and I'm studying men's rights issues and consider and call myself now a men's rights activist. That's why I'm studying narcissism and cluster Bs, because of its connection to false domestic violence claims and family court and parental alienation syndrome and tendencies from anybody, from either gender. I don't care what parent is trying to alienate another parent. It's destructive and should be acknowledged by basic common sense people and legislation through the courts. Like, that shouldn't be supported at all. If a parent is doing that, it should be seen as child abuse. And in my case, I feel it is child abuse. And in my case, I feel the whole legal process has been such extreme negligence that it can't be excused. And so what do? I start doing videos, I start talking to the people I love, the people that are immediately in my life, that are relevant to my case specifically, and try to heal, try to find common ground, try to have dialogue instead of debates, try to share authentically and listen actively. And so I try to repeat what I hear other people saying, so that I know they feel heard and that what I'm hearing is what they're actually trying to communicate. And so we advocate for healthy communication and practices just so we can talk with each other, period, whether on a video, in the public, or in private with our partners, friends, and family, and otherwise. So that's my main priorities right now, is finding peace for myself, for my family, and contributing to the benefit and the resurgence and the protection and the acknowledgement and the value of families. And I think there's a war against families. And I think there's a war against fathers. And I think some of it's unconscious and some of it's programmed and some of it is this leftist socialist mentality and isn't necessarily wicked and malicious in its intent. It's maybe misplaced good intent. And then some of it is wicked. Some of the lawyers I've had and some of the lawyers I've faced are wicked, and I don't use that word lightly. Like, these aren't just bad people. Like, I'll put criminals that I've seen, like low-end thieves and stuff, so much more ethical than these powerful, educated, heartless human beings. So we got a lot to change. I got a lot to change in myself. We all do, individually and collectively. And so men's rights is a part of that for me. Family value is a part of that. And I think that leads into politics. It leads into culture. I think culture and nations start with family, which starts with the men and the women and the children as the unit, and what we're teaching and how that leads to the greater society. So this is my attempt to continue the conversation, bear witness to my experience for the benefit of the conversation, for the benefit of understanding, and then finding solutions. So I hope it does that. It's helping me. So I hope it can help you. If you're another man going through this, through finding validation and networking and solidarity, support, understanding, as well as constructive challenge where it's warranted, from people that aren't trying to burn you and bring you down, destroy you, make you look stupid, but really try to problem solve and find truth, which then can lead to solutions. And for women that are, showing what good women should be, what intelligent, divine, feminine is. Because I want to align with you. I don't want to be MGTOW. I want to be connected with strong women, and I am. Thank God. That's why I'm not MGTOW, because I know there's still women that are good, that are positive, that are brilliant and inspiring and nurturing and exemplify not some preconceived construct of what a woman's supposed to be, but the ever-changing, ebb and flowing, ever-increasing and growing, greatest, grandest vision of what woman can be. That's what I'm hoping to do as man. So hopefully we can work this together, not just as man as woman, but as culture and culture, as nation and nation, as philosophy to philosophy, and bridge the gaps. Willie Lynch-free zone. Let's unite where we can and be peacefully nonviolent where we disagree. So support the non-aggression principle, the minimization of the state and big government. Let's be adults, tend to ourselves, detach from the nipple of the machine that is the government, and start to grow our own food, be good families, be good people, and transform the world the best we can. My name is MCAD. That's my Cliff Note story, AKA Rad Dad. It's a love revolution. Peace and love to you.
It's all coming together right here now. It's all coming together right here now. It's all coming together right here. Who's that? It's love. Can you feel it coming through that conscious revolutionary music? Yeah, you can feel it in your veins.
To need support is humbling. To receive support is equally humbling. I just have so much thanks for the love and support I've received spiritually, physically, emotionally, and financially. So for those who have asked, you can financially support us through our PayPal account. That's loveforpapa@gmail.com. And that's just my email address, love, the number 4, POPPA @gmail.com. I just have so much gratitude. So thank you. Do sage here for you. We sage ourselves. We'll sage for you too. Sage these cameras and these ELFs and all the frequencies.